The Radiant Citadel is home to a great number of unique and exciting cultures and customs, but today I want to take a look at the creatures that we may encounter on our journeys through it. Of course, the monsters in this book can fit into your own campaigns just as easily as the 13 adventures that they were made for, and to that end, I'm going to avoid any spoilers and specifics about the stories associated with them in case you decide to play through any of these adventures yourself. I'll also try to focus on the most impressive and intriguing parts of each stat block so you get a good idea of what each has to offer without going over every single detail. But with that said, let's get right into it with the Windling, a CR 1/2 creature that actually makes its debut appearance on the cover of this book. The tiny fake creature has a knack for causing trouble by harassing those around them with mischievous pranks and thievery meant to deter adventurers from lands they protect. With just 21 hit points and a respectable AC of 15, these little critters may not seem like much of a threat, but their true shining is found in their evasiveness, with a +7 to sleight of hand and stealth checks, a 40-foot flying speed, and several abilities that can make it pretty slippery even if you do manage to catch it. Cloak of the Mountain allows the Windling to become magically invisible for a minute or until it makes an attack roll. Do note that this means that it can still interact with objects, pick locks, or just mess with you in general so long as it doesn't make an attack roll. And all that without a concentration requirement, so this thing isn't dropping invisibility when it takes damage unless you kill it outright. And even if that invisibility drops for some reason, the Trickster's Flight ability allows the Windling to move up to 30 feet without provoking an opportunity attack as a reaction to seeing another creature miss it with an attack roll. So sure, this thing might not look like much in a combat scenario, but it could make for a very interesting pet or familiar if your DM allows it, or a really interesting encounter in general at the very least. Next, the Aurumvorax is somewhat of an interesting pack-based small monstrosity that can be quite aggressive and supplements its diet with a strong taste for metal and gold in particular. Similar to the last entry, the challenge rating of only 2 isn't going to frighten anyone on its own, but they do tend to work in groups and can easily overwhelm an unsuspecting party. They've also got an AC of 15 and 36 hit points, but they also have a burrow speed that they can use to drag prey away from a group and underground where they'd have an advantage, and their abilities speak to those tactics as well. Passively, Aurumvoraxes can burrow through solid rock and metal at half its burrowing speed, leaving behind a 5-foot diameter hole, and their claw attacks automatically grapple medium or smaller creatures on a hit. While the escape DC is only 12 from there, the creature can even drag what it's holding onto without any decrease to its movement speed. And if that wasn't enough, these packs of creatures are often accompanied by an even more dangerous den leader with a higher AC, more hit points, more movement, better stats, and even a few extra abilities, as you might expect with a change from CR2 to CR4. In particular, the pack leader ability will passively give allies of the Aurumvorax den leader advantage on all attack rolls while within 10 feet of it. Pack tactics? Anyone? Additionally, this creature does more damage with its attacks, has a higher 14 grapple escape DC, and can invigorate itself as an action to regain 1d8 plus 2 hit points. If I were running these in an encounter, I'd probably have them go after the party member carrying the most gold and have the den leader sitting just below the surface of the ground, giving advantage to all the others in its pack until it absolutely needs to intervene. Now let's give a big hand to our next creature, the Soul Shaker. This CR4 creature is often formed whenever piles of severed limbs come to life or whenever several crawling hands do a handshake. Once they've complemented each other on their grip strength, this large undead will come with the typical necrotic resistance and poison immunity, but it's also immune to being charmed, exhausted, frightened, grappled, paralyzed, petrified, poisoned, prone, or restrained. Of course, being a giant hand spaghetti can pose its own interesting challenges, like not having eyes or a mouth. Luckily, these things have blind sight and telepathy out to 60 feet. Now, it's too bad that your number of arms don't count towards your armor class, as this thing does only have a 13 AC and 76 hit points. But that isn't to say that this isn't better hand and fist over some other undead creatures. I promise, the jokes will stop soon, you won't have to live in pain much longer. Similar to the last entry, the Soul Shaker can auto-grapple a medium or smaller creature that it hits with an escape DC of 15, and then, as a bonus action, it can deal 2d6 necrotic damage to a grappled creature if they fail a DC 14 Constitution save and reduce their hit point maximum by that much, and consuming their vitality and healing itself for the same amount. And once per day, it can cast the Gias spell with a Wisdom save DC of 12. It doesn't require air, food, drink, or sleep, and most importantly, the Soul Shaker explodes into 1d4 plus 5 crawling claws when it's reduced to 0 hit points and can automatically reform after 1d12 days by teleporting back to the location of its death if at least 2 of those claws are still alive. You've gotta hand it to the Soul Shaker. Even if the party disposes this enemy easily enough the first time, they might only enjoy a hollow victory, especially if they kill it in a location they plan on leaving where it could reform and continue its perpetual handstand of terror. This is one of the most gripping undead enemies I've come across in a while. High five! Moving on, we have the tongue-twisting Tlacatecolo, which is a medium demon creature that looks something like a super sickly owlbear without the bear component. I'm not even sure what you'd call that. Whatever it might be, these creatures spread an illness spurred on by the dark and cold and feed on the suffering of mortals. Assuming your party survives the night, they'll have to face a CR5 creature with an AC of 13, 78 hit points, resistance to cold and poison damage, immunity to the poisoned condition, 120 feet of dark vision, and magic resistance for advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. And finding this thing might not even be all that easy, as it does have a somewhat limited change shape ability that allows it to become a medium owl without affecting its stats and abilities. And aside from its multi-attack that could dish out a pretty decent amount of damage, its box text translates to a truly potent attack called Plague Winds. This ability can only be used while it's not shape changed, but it allows the creature to emit a deadly wind in a 60-foot line that's 10 foot wide that requires each creature in that area to succeed a DC 13 Constitution save or take 4d12 cold damage and become poisoned. But this isn't your typical poisoned condition. When a creature is subjected to this special condition, it can't regain hit points and must succeed another Constitution save at the end of every hour against taking a level of exhaustion. And not even Lesser Restoration can cure this disease unless the creature is in direct sunlight, so this can be a real problem for adventurers that aren't familiar with the mechanics associated with it. Personally, I can't wait to run one of these the next time one of my groups decides to camp out in the middle of the woods at night. The Haint comes next as yet another undead creature, but these are somewhat unique as they are typically neutral in alignment. These creatures are essentially spirits that have come from those who died with regrets, and they take on a tragic form in imitation of what they were in life. And they themselves also have a somewhat tragic existence, as they might mistake innocents for enemies or those who wronged them before they died. Although they boast a 7 challenge rating, the creatures do only have a 12 AC with 75 hit points. But they'll likely get more mileage out of those stats with a 30-foot hovering fly speed, numerous resistances to acid, fire, thunder, non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, and outright immunity to cold, necrotic, and poison damage. They also have a slew of condition immunities, as they can't be charmed, exhausted, frightened, grappled, paralyzed, petrified, poisoned, prone, or restrained. And they seem quite adept at sneaking around and deceiving the party with a +8 and +6 to their respective checks. The Haint can remain evasive other ways as well, with the ability to move through other creatures and objects as difficult terrain, though they will take 1d10 force damage if it ends its turn inside an object. Does that mean that they can end their turn within a creature without consequence? Their base attacks do a fair amount of psychic damage as well, which is usually nice, and even has a chance to incapacitate a creature within 60 feet of them as a bonus action if the creature is missing any hit points and fails a 14 DC Wisdom saving throw. The effect even persists as they repeat the saving throw at the end of each of the creature's turns, though they do become immune for 24 hours once they succeed. And the Haint can even shape change into the humanoid that it used to be, giving you the opportunity to run a super interesting NPC NPC in a haunted setting that is a Haint and doesn't even know it. Now, the Whistler comes in as our first and only aberration from the book, and it definitely lives up to the hype. These large creatures are, of course, from the Far Realm and tend to be difficult to hit as they aren't exactly tethered to one point in space. Whatever that means, it boils down to attack rolls having disadvantage against this CR9 creature unless it's incapacitated. That's not too bad for a creature that has 180 hit points and a 15 AC, but when one of these is finally knocked out, they appear as a gray featureless humanoid with long limbs and thin fingers. They also have a massive plus 11 to stealth, 40 feet of movement speed, psychic resistance, blind sight, and 120 feet of telepathy. And that's good because these things love to stalk creatures of the material plane and invade their mind with an otherworldly melody that forces up to 2 creatures it can see within 120 feet to make a DC 16 wisdom save against 6d10 psychic damage in the frightened condition for a minute. This is yet another creature that dishes out psychic damage, and it even has a teleport as a bonus action every turn that allows it to move up to 20 feet. I can't lie, this is probably one of my favorites, and I'm a bit surprised that it only comes in at a CR9. This could be a lot more challenging than that if you run it right. But next, the Talexolotl is yet another banger from the Citadel and a great capstone to a fiery adventure. These creatures are huge elemental salamanders that sleep inside of dormant volcanoes and that only emerge every several centuries or so when disturbed by the volcano or by the adventurers themselves. At that point, this creature rampages with an aura of fire that deals 2d6 damage to each creature within 10 feet of it at the start of each of its turns or when it's touched or hit by a melee attack within 5 feet of it. It then devours all plants and wildlife that it can until it's satisfied and returns to its slumber. This truly devastating foe does only have a 15 AC and 104 hit points, and while it is immune to fire and poison damage, that leaves a lot to be desired for a CR10 creature, right? Well, the Talexolotl also gets a regeneration ability that allows it to regain 10 hit points at the start of each of its turns unless it has taken cold damage or been immersed in water in the last round. Further, it only dies if it starts its turn with 0 hit points and can't regenerate. Now that's the staying power we were looking for. And with that staying power, this thing can hit pretty hard with a fire-based multi-attack and an action called Pyroclasm, wherein lava erupts from the creature's body and deals 66 fire and 66 bludgeoning damage to creatures within a 30-foot radius sphere against a 15 DC dexterity saving throw for half damage. That can be a ton of damage if this thing uses its 40-foot movement speed to get into optimal position beforehand, and the attack really lends itself to some terrain-altering antics that can really spice up an encounter. Next, the Bakunawa is a pretty interesting one. We just got Fizzbands not even a year ago, and here we are with a brand new Gargantuan Dragon stat block. This particular variety is worshipped as an avatar of storms and the tide, brandishing iridescent scales that crackle with lightning. The body of this dragon is more serpentine than the usual D&D breed, but I feel that probably draws on the cultural significance of dragons to this adventure. And they're known to swallow whole any creatures that stand against them in battle. Mechanically, this occurs as part of their bite attack automatically, so long as the creature is large or smaller and fails a DC 17 strength saving throw. If they do fail, the creature is blinded, restrained, and takes 3d6 lightning damage at the start of each of the Bakunawa's turns. Up to 2 creatures at a time can be swallowed in this way, but each turn the Bakunawa takes 30 damage or more, there's a chance that all swallowed creatures are regurgitated, falling prone in a space within 15 feet. But that's just the creature's bite attack. It also has a Storm Slam attack that it can take as part of its multi-attack that deals only a small amount of thunder damage to a target within 10 feet, but also pushes that target 10 feet away. This whole stat block really sells to me that this dragon should be played by rushing in and out of range with its 60 feet of flying and swimming speed, swallowing its enemies and letting them just soak up damage over multiple turns with absolutely nothing they can do about it. But of course, we also have a set of 3 legendary actions per round on this bad boy, as well as 3 legendary resistances per day. Nimble Glide allows the Bakunawa to fly or swim up to half its movement speed without provoking opportunity attacks, furthering its ability to hit and run. Slam allows it to make an extra Storm Slam attack to gain even more distance against its opponents, and Lightning Strikes, which costs all 3 of its actions, deals 4d10 lightning damage to up to 2 creatures within 60 feet against a DC 15 dexterity save. This last one seems like more of a last resort to me, and the rest of the damage on its stat block isn't all that potent, but if you use it wisely, this dragon will live up to its name and its 12 challenge rating. Next, the Riverine also comes in with the CR12 as a large fey creature that takes form as the spirit of a particular river. They are mostly human in appearance from the waist up, but have a skin color that matches the water they dwell within, and either have legs or a tornado of water below their torso. Their personalities and dispositions tend to reflect the rivers and currents that they embody. Some are slow moving and lethargic, while others are wild and unpredictable. And the stat block shows that it only has a 14 AC, but 204 hit points, as well as some skill proficiencies in Insight, Nature, and Perception, which should be pretty helpful if you want to use one of these as an NPC or party encounters, and not necessarily just a fight to win. But if the tides turn in the direction of battle, your party will be up against a creature with 3 legendary resistances per day, the ability to cast Control Water, Fog Cloud, and Greater Restoration with a spell save DC of 17, and an attack with 10 feet of reach that deals 3d6 cold damage. And as a bonus action, the Riverine can also use Whirlpool Step to teleport within 30 feet of itself, so long as the space it leaves and the destination is in or on the surface of water. Does that mean that you could use it to bounce between puddles in the rain? I think so, but you probably shouldn't. Because, as you might guess, a Riverine is inherently tied to its lair, and as such, this particular creature does come with its own set of lair actions and regional effects. In fact, fighting a Riverine in such a location increases its CR to 13 instead of 12. For its lair actions, the Riverine can force a target to make a DC 17 Wisdom save against 1d10 psychic damage and being frightened until the end of the target's next turn, or it can create a 20-foot square area on the ground within 120 feet that then becomes difficult terrain until the next round and deals 2d6 cold damage to any creature that enters the area or starts its turn there. And its regional effects essentially allow it to cast the Clairvoyant spell at any point along its river, create an abundance of forageable fauna and flora within 1 mile of its lair, and to form magical tracks within 6 miles of its lair that can lead adventurers to shelter or steer them away from areas that the Riverine wants to protect. Really, this doesn't seem like a whole lot, but don't forget, this is in addition to the Riverine's other action economy, and we haven't even touched on its 3 legendary actions per round either. These actions will allow the Riverine to immediately teleport using its Whirlpool Step and deal 1d10 cold damage to each creature within 5 feet of its destination, or for 2 actions, unleash a torrent of water in a 30-foot line that is 5 foot wide, dealing 2d10 bludgeoning damage and knocking the creatures prone against a DC 17 dexterity save for half damage and not being knocked prone. Again, these abilities alone don't seem like a whole lot, but when you combine its relative evasiveness and a heaping helping of action economy, this can turn into quite the formidable foe. Speaking of formidable, we have yet to discuss the Pari, a medium celestial that is typically lawful good and has a challenge rating of 13 without lair actions this time. The creature itself has a pastel blue skin with a combination of robes and armor from which sprout 4 feathered red wings on their back. Honestly, this is probably one of my favorite looking monsters from this book, but the stat block does leave a bit to be desired, while at least leaving things short and sweet. It has an AC of 16, 180 hit points, and a massive 90-foot flying speed. It's also got a plus 16 to Insight and plus 11 to Perception, making it quite strong in social encounters as well, if you'd prefer to use it that way. It's resistant to fire, radiant, and non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, and it can't be charmed, exhausted, or frightened. Impressively, the Pari also has 120 feet of True Sight, speaks all languages, and has 120 feet of telepathy. You're gonna need one hell of a deception roll to pull something over on this thing. And when you inevitably fail that deception check, the stat block boasts magical resistance, a base attack with its mace that deals 1d6 plus 5 bludgeoning, and 4d6 radiant damage that gets swung 3 times on a multi-attack with a plus 10 to hit. It also has a spell save DC of 19 when it casts Detect Evil and Good, Cure Wounds at 6th level, Lesser Restoration, Commune as an action, and Dispel Evil and Good. But possibly the best part of its combat features involves the use of its Disorienting Futures ability as an action, which allows it to target a creature that it can see within 60 feet and force it to make a DC 19 Wisdom saving throw against 5d10 psychic damage and have disadvantage on attack rolls until the start of the Pari's next turn. Now, don't get me wrong, the Pari can be a massive threat on the battlefield, but unlike our last few entries, it is lacking a bit in action economy, and will probably not last long on its own. My advice would be to pair this with a couple of other celestial creatures to allow the Pari to fly in and out of range to hinder the party's attempts to fight its allies. And maybe I'm missing a bit here, after all most of its saving throws are pretty damn high, but I'm overall very happy with these new monster entries. Not only can I imagine enjoying using them in these adventures, but I can also see myself placing them into my own homebrew settings to great effect. And on that note, let me know down in the comments if you'd like me to make another video covering the adventures from which these creatures hail. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel while you're down there, and as always, go out there and make some chaos.